If there's one thing that we Missouri fans like to do the last few months is prove Oklahoma fans wrong, especially about Williams Nwaneri. So let's do it once again, coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and a guy so obsessed with Mizzou football and basketball, I had to go 5 days a week on a podcast, so thanks for joining me once again. And coming up on today's program, I want to talk about how it's put up or shut up time this season for Missouri's relationship with Nike, in my humble opinion. Also going to talk some Mizzou basketball portal news and 3 teams to avoid in your brackets for March Madness this season. Really quickly, I do also want to remind you that these days every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And if there's one thing I've been reminded of, now that Oklahoma is making their way back to the Southeastern Conference, their fans online sure are an obnoxious bunch, aren't they? And in fact, they've gotten a lot of reasons to be loud and up in Missouri fans' faces online the last few months. I will give them that. And the conventional wisdom, we'll just say, coming out of Oklahoma from a lot of their fans and some of the reporting coming out of Norman as well, is that Missouri only got Cayden Green, the left tackle, Missouri's left tackle, right now coming up for 2024. At least as of right now, he's Missouri's starting left tackle. Well, he was Oklahoma's left guard last season. And again, the conventional wisdom coming out of that state is that Missouri only got them because of NIL, because of significant outbids in the market, overbids, if you will, for Cayden Green, and a high school player out of Lee Summit North named Williams Nwaneri, who I'm sure all of you are familiar with at this point. But, of course, a guy who's ranked by some as the top player in the country, coming in as a defensive lineman, at least top 5 at the very least. And in some ways, you can kind of understand what Oklahoma fans are thinking, because let's be real, obviously Oklahoma traditionally and recently, other than perhaps last season, has been the superior program to Missouri, no doubt about that. So from a Sooner fan's perspective, you might be thinking, well, how else could anyone turn down the great Oklahoma Sooners for the lowly Missouri Tigers? Again, at least that's how their thinking went. But if you step through this thinking, it starts to make a heck of a lot less sense, because number one, that's not how markets actually work. You see, if you overbid somebody for a house, for instance, as my wife and I did, by the way, during the summer of 2020, we got a house because we were willing to pay more than somebody else. Well, it wasn't by a factor of 2 or 4, that's for sure. In other words, I didn't say, hey, I'll double that other person's bid. That's not how this stuff works. And indeed, that's not how the name, image, and likeness market works either, although it seemed like a lot of Oklahoma fans, including ones tweeting at me over this offseason saying, well, they only got Cayden Green because they paid literally 4 times as much as Oklahoma was willing to. Well, if you don't believe me, if you don't believe that that's not exactly how human beings behave in reality, well, maybe take Grace Rayner's word for it over at The Athletic, who just quoted Jamar Mosey, let me correct that, Jamar Mosey, who was Lee Summit North's coach. He was the coach for Williams Nwaneri, and here's his quote. He says, "It's not like Williams couldn't get a good NIL deal at other places. All the schools he was interested in had their own level of NIL, and it was competitive, as it should be. That factor allowed him to pick the school he wanted to be at. I think people don't understand that. He picked the school he wanted to go to because it was all competitive. So in other words, who knows? He's not exactly saying, hey, maybe Missouri did have the best NIL offer. But again, it wasn't by a factor of 10. It wasn't as though Missouri was offering them $1 million when Oklahoma can only go 200,000 or 100,000, something like that. Just throwing out some even numbers there. That's just not a realistic scenario whatsoever. And if that really were it, well, frankly, Missouri would probably be overspending on that player and clearly could have doubled that instead of 10 times it, that kind of thing. All of this thinking is ridiculous. And to me, Jamar Mosey there, the former now head coach of Lee Summit North, just that explanation there just makes all the sense in the world. So again, yes, Oklahoma, a great school, a school that's put out tons of offensive linemen, in particular in the NFL the last couple decades or so. There's a million reasons somebody wouldn't want to go there. But at the same time, maybe Oklahoma fans have to accept that there's a lot of good reasons to want to go to Missouri right now as well. Obviously, 2023 was a breakout season for the Mizzou football team and program. And to me, because of that, I think it's absolutely time for Nike to step up its game when it comes to Mizzou and its apparel. And frankly, if it doesn't, I think Missouri should actually seek out some different options. And I want to give you a clear-cut example of what exactly I'm talking about here. Let me share my computer screen here with you for a moment. Now, as you can see here, we're taking a look at Missouri's official online store, a Fanatics experience, as it says here, shop.mutigers.com. A simple filter here. I've simply filtered it down by just the brand Nike. And what you have here is 41 possible selections. This is men, women, kids, the whole deal. Every type of apparel you could possibly imagine. And I happen to like these two sweatshirts here at the top, by the way. You keep scrolling down. Hey, I kind of like the KC shooting shirt, but frankly, a lot of this stuff is somewhat generic and some of it's fairly old, like this polo shirt, for instance, a simple black logo, this sweatshirt. This is stuff that has been basically available for years now, I would say. And again, really the main thing to keep in mind here is that number of 41. So let's head over to the Ohio State fan site. Why Ohio State? Well, obviously Ohio State, a much bigger name than Missouri. They have a lot more fans. No question about that, for basically all the reasons I just discussed about the Oklahoma Sooners. But again, a simple actual filter here. Adult Ohio State Nike merchandise. Well, how many pieces do they have? 312. So 312 versus 41. And that doesn't even include kids stuff either. So that's just not really even comparable. And by the way, you start looking at the Ohio State merchandise as well. Just a lot of different selections that you don't see on the Missouri side, to say the least, from slides to a bunch of different types of basketball jerseys. We're not even into the football stuff yet. Heck, they've even got 2 different types of LeBron James Ohio State jerseys. I'm sorry, what time portal did I just fall into? I guess Missouri should start selling, I don't know, Kevin Garnett jerseys too, if we're just going to start making stuff up completely. But again, you've even got Ohio State baseball jerseys and hockey jerseys and, of course, football jerseys, lacrosse stuff. I mean, everything you could possibly imagine. This is just the first page. Heck, go into page 3, page 4, page 5. You're talking about joggers and golf stuff and different types of throwback shirts. I mean, it's not even comparable is the point. And the reason I picked Ohio State obviously is also because Missouri beat Ohio State recently as well. And while obviously Missouri has not caught up to Ohio State at this point in terms of fans or anything like that, clearly the needle should be moving up for Mizzou. To me, now is the time for Missouri to act like its brand means something, because it does, especially at this moment when the Missouri football team is on the way up. And by the way, Missouri has great colors and great logos, as you can see partially behind me, all these mini helmets. And their current fan base, the current Tiger fans, they're going to jump on the apparel bandwagon this offseason if you put out good stuff. Missouri fans are as bandwagony as any in the country. And by the way, as Ohio State has proven, if you keep winning, others will jump on the bandwagon as well. So there is more out there than just Nike, and there's more out there than just Under Armour and Reebok too. To me, if you're Missouri, reach out to somebody like Puma. Obviously, one of the biggest footwear names in the world and one of the biggest names in the soccer world as well. Manchester City, for instance, maybe the top club in the world, one of the biggest brand names in terms of sports in the world. They're outfitted by Puma. Why couldn't Missouri be a Puma school? I know they don't do college football. Why couldn't Missouri be the first? Honestly, there's no reason for the Tigers to sell themselves short in a moment where we're possibly going to be in the playoff this year. You certainly have those aspirations. It would have happened in the 12-teamer if there was one last season. So if you're the Tigers, again, don't let Nike sell you short. That's all I'm saying. Nike, time to step up your game, or Missouri should start looking elsewhere, in my opinion. And with the transfer portal opening in basketball today, you've got some fairly significant, if not household names hitting it already. So let's talk about that. One's linked to Mizzou coming up here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about Nissan. And this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The Oregon Ducks are obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance in the final Pac-12 tournament, punching their ticket to the big dance. They say, win life, go Rogue. And that's exactly what the Ducks have done here. So take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Do you ever watch a movie and go, hey, is that guy from that thing? Well, with Amazon Prime, you can hit pause and find out exactly that with just one click. That's why it's my favorite place to watch movies. Well, guess what? Now Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers incredible viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Well, Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. Fire TV channels let you dive in on all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports. We're talking March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more, not to mention news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you got to do it. Just trust me. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Thanks, as always, for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. I'll tell you what my second listen is going to be today. It's going to be the Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown Show. Now available on my feed, by the way, here on Locked On Mizzou. Also on the Locked On College Basketball podcast feed. Andy Patton, Isaac Shade. And the reason I like this show, it's just going to make sure there's no big details that I miss. 68 teams, right? You can't know everything. They're going to hit all the big high. Sure, there aren't any major college bracket breakdown. That's exactly what you're getting. The Locked On College Basketball bracket breakdown. I'm going to be checking it out on the Locked On College Basketball podcast feed. And you know what? I think you should too. And speaking of college basketball, of course, plenty to talk about there as well, and some fairly significant, again, some names that probably most of us don't know, but definitely some significant names that we're going to get to know here maybe over the next couple weeks or so. Some of them already saying, hey, Missouri's been in contact with me, or there's been outlets like On3 saying that guys like Jacob Cruz of Tennessee Martin have already heard from the Tigers, among many others like Kansas and Gonzaga, by the way, which makes sense. Jacob Cruz, a guy, a power forward, averaged 19 points and 8 rebounds last season with Tennessee Martin on 41% three-point shooting as well. Obviously, he fits the Dennis Gates mold of basketball, but clearly if Gonzaga and the Jayhawks of Kansas are after you, tells you that just about everybody in the country, he fits that mold too. So a lot of competition there, but again, we heard from dozens of players in the portal last season that said that they had heard from Missouri. To what level of interest there is at this point is impossible, I think, certainly for me to say. I'll just put it that way. Also, some other guys that have been public with their contact with Missouri: Furman small forward Marcus Foster, as well as Central Arkansas guard Cameron Hunter, and Javon Porter has said he's been in touch with the Tigers as well. We've obviously talked quite a bit about Javon in last week's episodes. Obviously a Columbia native, brother of Jonte and Michael Porter Jr., all that good stuff. So former Pepperdine guy, just in case you were unaware. But Javon, with a couple years left to play, could be spending him here in Columbia once again. Now, at this point in my bracket filling out process, I definitely have not made all my picks, but I am leaning toward somebody to win it all, that's for sure. And I'll get to that here in just a second. But there's one thing that I think we all should do as Missouri fans this season. Let's all make a pact. In every single one of our brackets, let's take Samford to beat Kansas. Honestly, let's just do it. Who cares? Throw caution to the wind. And if you're like my good friend Blake, well, he picks against Kansas every single season, even if they're a 1 against a 16. And God love him for that. But I, for one, was never able to go quite that far. But this season, a 4 against a 13, honestly, this is supposed to be fun. So let's have some fun and root for Samford against Kansas. And especially if you take a peek over at our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook at 7.5 is the point spread, plus 250 on the money line, Samford to win the game outright. Well, heck, stranger things have happened than that. In fact, a lot stranger things have happened than that. I think I'll even go down with the Samford ship in my suicide pool in day one of the tournament. I think that's maybe the Thursday game that I like the most. And not only is it a great emotional hedge, but if I actually win that game, if Samford upsets Kansas, well, I'll have a nice 13 points in the bank for that suicide pool tiebreaker. For those of you who have never played that type of game, well, you'd pick one team for every day of the tournament just to win, but you can't pick them again, sort of like an NFL suicide pool. But the catch is, hey, if it's tied at the end, if there's two people tied at the end, either at the very end, nobody's lost, or maybe they lose in the same round, the last competitors, well, then there's the tiebreaker, and that's where you're encouraged to pick upsets. So that's the part of the logic there with Samford is, hey, day one, I'll get a nice 13 points in my tiebreaker bank here. So in other words, if you're a 13 seed, you get 13 points. You're a 4 seed, you get 4 points, et cetera, et cetera. But long story short, I think we should, all as Missouri fans, come together in our love to hate Kansas. That's my advice. Let's have some fun and ride with Samford in all of our brackets and contests. And coming up, I am going to tell you who I am leaning toward to cut down the nets here in early April, plus 3 teams that I'm absolutely going to fade. We're talking some of the best teams out there. These are teams I'm going to be fading in my bracket, and I think you should as well. So let's talk about that coming up here in just a little bit. But first, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And I'll just tell you from personal experience, there's no bigger difference between the right professionals and the wrong professionals. The right person is going to make your job so much easier and is going to be a net positive in your life. Whether as the wrong person, well, that person could literally be hard for you to get rid of. So here's the plus. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. And hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So how can they possibly be wrong? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So this season in March Madness, I have a strange feeling that recent history is going to repeat itself. And I'm talking about history from just 5 years ago. Although 2019 sometimes in my mind, everything before the COVID lockdowns and all that kookiness all seems a little bit strangely longer ago than it really was in some ways. But just 5 years ago, you may have forgotten, the Virginia Cavaliers won the national championship the year after being the first number 1 seed to fall to a 16 seed in March Madness history. Well, of course, last year it was the Purdue Boilermakers who lost to Fairleigh Dickinson as they a 1 versus a 16. History happened again. Well, I think it's going to happen similarly again this year for Purdue. Purdue right now is my pick to win the national championship. And I understand that Zach Edey can be a little bit of a polarizing figure, mostly because of his NBA prospects. Is he an NBA guy or not in terms of how effective do you think he's going to be at the next level? Is he just a guy, or is he going to be a real problem at the next level? I'm not totally sure where I get down on that particular opinion at this point, but what I know is in college basketball, Zach Edey was the best player in college basketball this season, in my opinion. And I didn't think it was particularly close. For as good as Dalton Connect was and several other players, to me, Edey was dominant at both ends of the court, unlike anybody else. So to me, you've got the best player in college basketball. And while that obviously an embarrassing loss for Purdue last season, to me, that's the type of loss I predicted, by the way, in 2019. Virginia was my pick to win in 2019. And my logic was actually for the next season, losing in that embarrassing of a fashion and having most of your team back, that's actually a positive for the next season. That means you're going to be laser focused. And you talk about Eli Drinkwitz and company likes to talk about something to prove. Well, I think Virginia had something to prove in 2019, and I think Zach Edey and the Boilermakers are going to have something to prove this season as well. I think they're tired of hearing about Matt Painter and his struggles in the tournament. I think now they just have a feeling that this is their year. At least that's where I'm leaning right now. And by the way, it's not all just a gut feeling either. If you actually look at Purdue this season versus last, I think their guards are significantly better, especially just as terms of shooting. Purdue, one of the elite three-point shooting teams in the entire country this year. That was not the case last season. So I think that was as much of a reason for them getting upset last season as anything. I just think Purdue, at the very least, I'm going to have them making a really long run this year. I don't think they're going to get upset early in the tournament whatsoever. And you know what? Finally, as to three teams I am going to fade in the tournament, some three pretty big name squads that, well, including the Big Ten champions, your Illinois Fighting Illini. Well, why am I fading the Illini? Well, it's not just because I'm a Missouri fan and I'm stinging from this year's bragging rights game. Well, there's a lot of games that stung as a Missouri fan this season. But if you followed me closely, you probably know where I'm going with this if you're an everydayer. But I really like to avoid the mediocre to below average defensive teams in terms of making significant runs in the tournament. Now, I'm not saying that any of these next three teams are teams that I'm going to pick to lose in the first round or anything like that. I just think if you're going to completely rely on offense, at a certain point, that's going to flame out. There's no way you're going to win 6 games in a row playing mediocre to below average defense. I just think the likelihood of that is very, very low. Let's put it that way. So to me, there's 3 obvious teams then at the upper echelon of the bracket that you need to fade. It's the Illinois Fighting Illini, it's the Alabama Crimson Tide, and it's the Kentucky Wildcats. And somewhat sadly for me, the Kentucky Wildcats, because as soon as Kentucky's let me find his name here, Zvonimir Ivicevic, easy for me to say, but he's a 7'2" young man who can shoot. And if you know anything about me and basketball players, if you're tall and you can shoot, well, I'm a complete sucker for that. And when Ivicevic, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, which I'm almost certainly not, but when he came on for Kentucky, I was initially very excited, as any 7'2" shooter will get me. But I came to realize, you know what? I just don't think it's happening for the Wildcats this season. They've got a good ball club, no doubt. I'm not picking them to lose in the first round, as they've known to be upset lately. I don't think I'm going to go that far with it whatsoever. But at the same time, Kentucky, for them to be 108th nationally in adjusted defense, yeah, that's not doing it for me. Same with Alabama's 112th and Illinois' 93rd. That's just outside. Again, there's 60 some odd high major teams, give or take. That's just not doing it for me. So to me, you should be bullish on Purdue, as we say in the stock market. I'm leaning toward the Boilermakers to win it all this season. But I think you should fade Illinois, Alabama, and Kentucky, at least in terms of making a deep run to the Final Four or something like that. So thanks for joining me, and thanks for indulging my somewhat non-related, well, let's be honest, completely non-related Missouri thoughts here at the end of the show. Figured, though, those of you like my program would enjoy my thoughts on the bracket here coming up, and I'll certainly have more thoughts and picks in the coming days as we get to Thursday. No question about that. But again, Samford, we're all picking Samford. Remember, pinky promise, we're doing it. Don't break it, or you might go on the Power Mizzou list. So until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.